There is a silence that doesn't soothe, it stirs. Have you ever noticed how, when life finally slows down, the noise inside your mind seems to grow louder? They told us that peace would come with age, but no one warned us about the storm of memory, the weight of stillness, or the quiet ache of questions left unanswered. What do you do when you've spent your whole life being someone, and suddenly, no one needs you to be anyone? As the great Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind there are few. So what if this season of life, is not an ending, but the most important beginning?" Welcome, dear friend, to Mindful Footsteps. This is not just a channel, it is a pause, a soft turning inward, a gentle space for those who are ready to explore what lies beyond doing, into the art of simply being. If you felt the stirrings of this silence, the beautiful, aching, mysterious kind, then you're in the right place. Together, we'll walk the path of presence, of surrender, of letting go, not in theory, but through lived stories, spiritual practices, and timeless reflections. So I invite you now to breathe, to stay, and if this resonates, to like, comment, and share with others on the same quiet search. And when you're ready, subscribe, not just to a channel, but to a journey. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Control. There comes a moment in life, not always dramatic, not always loud, but unmistakably real. A moment when, despite all the years spent planning, preparing, and persevering, something within you whispers, maybe? I was never really in control. Have you ever felt that? Perhaps in a hospital waiting room. Perhaps standing alone at a grave. Perhaps while watching your children walk away into lives you can no longer shape. It's a deeply human experience, and it's also a deeply spiritual one. The myth we were all taught. From the moment we could walk and talk, we were taught to manage, to take charge, to strive, to succeed. We were told to set goals, to hustle, to take life by the horns. But has anyone ever asked you this? What if all this controlling is actually what's making you suffer? What if control isn't power, but fear in disguise? You see, the world taught us that control brings safety, but the Buddha taught that clinging creates suffering. And what is control if not a form of clinging? Let's pause here. How many of your plans worked out exactly the way you intended? Your career, your marriage, your health, your dreams? Think of Steve Jobs, brilliant, visionary, a man who revolutionized the modern world. But even he, with all his genius and control over technology, could not control the illness that eventually took his life. In one of his final public speeches, he said, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose." That wasn't fear. That was surrender. That was wisdom. What happens when life refuses to obey control works until it doesn't. We can schedule every meeting, prepare every detail, secure every insurance, track every calorie, and still, life shows up with its own plan. A sudden illness, a global pandemic, a betrayal you didn't see coming, a goodbye you didn't ask for. Control gives us the illusion that we can avoid pain, but the truth is, pain is part of life. Suffering is optional. The difference? Suffering comes from resisting what is, and resistance is control's shadow. I remember a man, once a CEO of a large firm, who visited our monastery. A man used to giving orders, signing contracts, managing empires. But in his 60s, after losing his wife unexpectedly, he came seeking something no boardroom had ever offered him: peace. He told me, I tried to negotiate my way through grief, but it was the first time in my life I couldn't fix something. He wept, not out of despair, but from the soft realization that he had built his life on control, and now that foundation was crumbling. But here's the miracle: that crumbling became his liberation. The storm and the grip. There's an old Buddhist parable I often return to, one you may remember. A man is caught in a terrible storm, wind howling, rain pouring, thunder crashing. He clutches a tree branch for dear life and screams into the chaos, "Please, let the storm pass so I can let go." But a teacher nearby and still replies, "No, dear one, let go and the storm will pass." Think about that for a moment. What if the storm isn't what's shaking you? What if it's your grip? This is not a call to recklessness. It's a call to recognize our grasping, our desperate need to hold on often creates more turbulence than the storm itself. When we say, "I can't let go because everything will fall apart," perhaps the deeper truth is, everything is falling apart because we won't let go. Sister Mai, the principal who couldn't stop planning. Let me tell you about Sister Mai. She was a retired school principal, organized, precise, respected. For decades, she ran one of the top schools in her district, a woman who carried calendars like armor, who knew every student's name and every teacher's schedule. But after retirement and the sudden passing of her husband, the life she managed so tightly began to unravel. She came to our monastery not looking for enlightenment, but for rest. She confessed one day, over tea, "I don't know how to just be. If I'm not fixing something, I feel useless." She said this with tears in her eyes, not tears of weakness, but of exhaustion. And I told her something simple, something I hope you remember too. Rest is not laziness. Trust is not recklessness, and surrender is not failure. Over time, she began to change, not by effort, but by softening. She walked slowly. She smiled more. She began to cook, not for results, but for joy. She even began sitting quietly by the lotus pond for hours. She let go, not of love or values, but of the need to manage every outcome. And in that letting go, she bloomed. So, what is true control? Here's the paradox. We find the deepest peace not when we control life, but when we live in harmony with it. That doesn't mean we stop showing up. It means we stop forcing the outcome. Control says, "This must go my way." Surrender says, "Let me meet what is with wisdom." Control says, "If I don't hold this together, everything will collapse." Surrender says, "Maybe it's not mine to hold anymore." Control is the clenched fist. Surrender is the open palm. Which one are you living with? Interactive moment. Let's pause together. Let me ask you right now. What are you gripping tightly in your life? What do you believe you must control in order to feel safe? Who are you trying to save, fix, or manage? What would happen if you opened your hands? Feel free to pause this video and share in the comments. What have I been gripping too tightly? Let's support each other. You're not alone in this journey. And if you've already begun to let go, tell us. What did surrender give you that control never could? A simple practice to begin letting go. Every morning, before you begin your day, sit quietly for 2 minutes. Place your hands in your lap, palms up. Take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, say silently, "I release what I cannot control." Then breathe in, "I trust the flow of life." Do this for 7 days. You may be amazed at what softens inside you. Final thought, you don't have to stop doing. Let's be clear. Letting go doesn't mean abandoning your life. You don't have to stop doing. You don't have to walk away from your family. You don't need to quit your job, sell your house, or move to the mountains. You just need to stop gripping. You need to stop believing that you alone are responsible for holding the universe together. Because here's the quiet truth. The universe was never asking you to carry it. It was asking you to move with it. And once you do, you may just find that the current you were fighting was actually trying to carry you all along. Chapter 2. Embracing Surrender. There is a moment in every seeker's life when striving begins to feel heavy, like trying to swim upstream with the river at your back. And something inside you, not the mind, but something older, begins to whisper, "What if I stopped fighting?" That whisper is not weakness. It is not defeat. It is the first breath of surrender. But what does surrender really mean? Let me ask you a question. What if surrender isn't the end of effort, but the beginning of trust? What if surrender isn't about giving up, but about giving in to something deeper than your plans? A young monk's question. There's a story I want to share with you. Maybe it will sound familiar. A young monk, filled with fire and frustration, came to his teacher. He had been meditating, fasting, studying scriptures for years. But still, peace felt out of reach. With eyes burning, he asked, "Master, when will I become enlightened?" The teacher, instead of answering, walked silently to a nearby stream. He pointed to the water, flowing, glistening, effortless, and said only this, "When you stop trying to hold the water, let that settle in. How long have you been trying to hold the water, forcing things to go your way, clinging to how love should feel, demanding life show up on your schedule, or expecting healing to look like a straight line?" The stream doesn't need to be held, it only needs to be witnessed. Surrender feels like an exhale. I want you to try something right now. Take a deep breath in. Hold it. Hold it a little longer. Feel the tension. Now, exhale. That is what surrender feels like. Not falling apart, not giving up, but finally releasing the tension you've carried for so long that you forgot you were even holding it. You see, surrender isn't dramatic. It's not some grand decision made on a mountaintop. It's quiet. Like coming home after a long journey, it's the body unclenching, the heart softening. It's the breath you've been waiting your whole life to take. The lie of letting go means apathy. Sometimes people hear the word surrender and think it means indifference. They say, "If I surrender, does that mean I stop caring? Do I just let people walk over me? Do I stop setting goals or taking responsibility?" Absolutely not. Surrender is not apathy. It is alignment. It is not the absence of care, but the presence of deeper compassion. The kind that doesn't come from needing to fix or force, but from simply being with what is. Have you ever held a crying child? Not tried to fix them, not shushed them, just held them. That's surrender. It's showing up fully for life, without needing life to perform for you in return. The death of should. Here's a truth most people spend a lifetime avoiding. Peace doesn't come from things going your way. It comes from no longer needing them to. And that begins when we release one of the most dangerous words in the human language, should. My parents should have loved me better. My partner should understand me. My life should be further along. Every should is a rope around your own heart. Now don't get me wrong. Injustice exists. Pain exists. But your peace will not come from re-editing the past. It will only come when the mind stops insisting on how things ought to be and starts meeting life as it actually is. That moment, that's when real presence begins. Because how can you be fully here if your mind is arguing with what's already happened? The practice, watching the stream. Let me offer you a simple practice. You don't need a monastery or a guru, just a few quiet minutes, a willingness to observe. If you can, go sit beside a stream. If not, close your eyes and imagine one. A gentle, flowing stream. Cool, clear, moving naturally. Now picture your thoughts as leaves on the water. They float in and float out. Don't chase them. Don't grab them. Just notice. A thought arises. I need to be better. Let it float by. Another. Why did they hurt me? Let it drift. Even this one. Am I doing this right? Let that go too. You are not your thoughts. You are the witness of them. And slowly, without force, the river of the mind grows still. Famous lives, quiet surrenders. Let's take a moment to look at those we consider powerful. Not the loud kind of power, but the deep, quiet kind. Nelson Mandela, after 27 years in prison, said, "As I walked out the door toward my freedom, I knew that if I didn't leave my bitterness behind, I'd still be in prison." That is surrender. Oprah Winfrey, after years of striving and pushing to prove her worth, finally said, "I surrendered all. I stopped praying for outcomes and started praying for guidance." That is surrender. They didn't stop acting. They stopped controlling. And from that release came real strength. A question for you. Let's take a breath here and ask gently, what are you still trying to control? What outcome are you chasing, clinging to, forcing? Who are you trying to fix before you feel okay? And the bigger question, what would happen if you didn't have to fix it? Not because you don't care, but because you finally trust that life is wise enough to unfold without your white-knuckle grip. Take a moment. Reflect on this. What am I ready to surrender? Let this be the beginning of your freedom. You might even inspire someone else. The fruit of surrender. Presence. When we stop insisting on how things should be, we begin to actually see how things are. That is the gateway to presence. You begin to taste your tea again. You begin to hear the birds, not just your thoughts. You begin to see the people in front of you, not just your idea of who they should be. And you begin, slowly, to return to yourself. You realize you were never chasing peace. You were running from surrender. Final reflection. The river has always known. If there is one thing I would want you to remember from this chapter, it's this. You are not here to control the river. You are here to trust it. Control may give you short bursts of power, but surrender will give you a lifetime of peace. Because the river has always known where it's going. Chapter 3. Letting go of identity and ego. Who are you? When no one needs you to be anything. That question doesn't come early in life. It doesn't show up when you're busy building resumes, raising families, or chasing validation. It comes later, quietly, in stillness, when the house is empty, when the job title is gone, when the phone stops ringing and no one is asking you for anything. You look in the mirror, and the usual answers don't hold. Not mother, not manager, not husband, not helper, just you. And the question, who am I now? And that is where the real journey begins. The illusion of identity. Most of us live wrapped in stories, not just about the world, but about ourselves. I am the responsible one. I am the one who fixes everything. I am the successful one. I am the one who never gets angry. These stories help us survive. They give us a role to play. But eventually, even the best costumes start to itch. Have you ever felt it? The quiet exhaustion of always being on. The fear that if you stop performing your role, you'll disappear? That fear is the ego speaking. But you, the real you, is not your role. You are not the character. You are the awareness watching the play. The Buddhist teaching of anatta. There is a teaching in Buddhism called anatta. It means non-self. Not in the sense that you don't exist, but in the sense that you are not the fixed identity you think you are. You are not your name. You are not your job. You're not even your thoughts. The self you cling to, that collection of opinions, memories, habits, is like a mist, useful sometimes, but not solid, not permanent. And when you begin to understand this, something softens. You stop needing to defend yourself all the time. You stop reacting as if every comment is a threat. You stop clinging so tightly to being right or important or wise. You begin to breathe again. The nurse who lost her name. Let me tell you a story. A nurse I once knew had worked for over 35 years in hospitals. She was respected, needed, busy, and then she retired. She didn't expect what came next. Without her badge, her scrubs, her calendar, she felt invisible. She told me once with tears in her eyes, "I don't know who I am if no one's in a hospital bed needing me." For months she felt adrift, until one morning she found herself in the garden, not doing anything in particular, just listening to the wind through the leaves, watching the bees, tasting a tomato warm from the sun, and something shifted. She began writing little poems, walking every morning just to hear the birds. She wasn't trying to be anyone anymore. And for the first time in decades, she said, "I feel like myself again." But here's the secret. It wasn't a new self she found. It was the self that had always been there, underneath the role. My own struggle. I'll share something personal. When I first became a monk, I was young and eager. I wanted to be the wise one, the calm one, the teacher everyone could rely on. I wore that identity like a robe, not just literally. But the truth is, I was still full of questions, still stumbling, still human. One day, after a talk I gave, a child came up to me. She looked at me very seriously and said, "You don't always have to be the teacher, you know." That one sentence pierced straight through the performance. She was right. Sometimes, the deepest wisdom comes when we stop trying to be wise, when we stop needing to know, when we're just there, present, honest, open. Letting go is not losing. I want to be clear. Letting go of identity is not about erasing yourself. It's about freeing yourself. Think of it like loosening a tight belt. You're not losing your pants. You're just breathing again. When you let go of ego, you gain space. Space to laugh at yourself. Space to change space to love others without needing them to mirror you. The ego wants control. The soul wants freedom. Which one are you feeding? Who are you without the roles? Take a breath with me. Now consider, who would you be if no one expected anything from you today? Not the parent, not the boss, not the fixer, not even the spiritual one, just the open space behind it all. Would you feel lost? Or maybe relieved? Could you give yourself permission to exist without achievement? Could you be lovable without being useful? These are hard questions, but they are holy questions, because your truest self has nothing to prove. The stillness behind the name. In meditation, we sometimes use a practice called neti neti. It means Not this, not that. You sit in silence and slowly peel away each layer of identity. I am not my thoughts. I am not my fears. I am not even my name. What remains is awareness, presence, love. What remains is you, the unchanging witness, the one who was there before the stories began and will remain after they end. Reflection, a letter across time. If you're willing, I invite you to try something. Take a piece of paper and write a letter from your current self to your childhood self, not to correct them, not to change them, but to speak kindly, to say, I see you. I know what you've been through, and I love who you've become. Tell them about the roles you've picked up along the way. Tell them which ones you've released, and then tell them what's left, the part of you that time couldn't touch. You might be surprised at what comes through. Final thought. You are not who the world told you to be. You are not your successes. You are not your failures. You are not the story that plays in your head. You are the silence between the thoughts, the stillness beneath the noise, the presence watching it all unfold. And once you touch that truth, even for a moment, you realize you never needed to become anything. You only needed to remember who you already are. Chapter 4. The Gentle Power of Allowing. One of the most radical, most healing forms of love is allowing. To allow is not to give up. It is not passive. It is not lazy. Allowing is courageous. It is awake. It is the choice to stop forcing life to fit the mold we've made for it. It begins here, letting others be, letting life move, letting yourself feel fully, without rushing to fix or figure it out. And yet, why is that so hard? Why do we feel the need to label every moment, every emotion, every outcome? Why do we jump so quickly to this is bad or this is good? Why, when the truth is, we don't really know yet. The story of the farmer. There's a Zen story I've returned to many times. You may have heard it. But listen again, slowly. A farmer's horse runs away. His neighbors come rushing over. Oh no, how terrible. The farmer simply says, maybe yes, maybe no. The next day, the horse returns and brings with it 3 wild horses. Now the neighbors say, how wonderful, you're so lucky. Again, the farmer replies, maybe yes, maybe no. Then the farmer's son tries to ride one of the wild horses and falls, breaking his leg. Oh no, the neighbors cry. What misfortune? Maybe yes, maybe no. And finally, soldiers come to the village, drafting young men for war. But the farmer's son is spared because of his broken leg. What's the point? Life unfolds in ways we cannot predict. And our suffering often comes not from what's happening, but from how quickly we decide what it means. Letting go is not giving up. Allowing doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop doing. It means you stop gripping. You stop trying to wrangle every moment into your expectations. You stop reacting from fear and start responding from presence. Have you ever noticed that when you stop pushing so hard, life has a way of organizing itself? That when you stop forcing a conversation, the right words come? That when you stop trying to fix your sadness, it softens on its own? There's a sacred intelligence in things, but we miss it when we're too busy controlling. Compassion begins with allowing. Most of us are quick to judge our feelings. Anxiety, push it away. Grief, hide it. Anger, suppress it. Tired, push through. But true compassion begins when you say to yourself, it's okay to feel this. This belongs here. I don't need to solve this. Just witness it. Think of how you treat a friend who's hurting. You don't interrupt them and say, "Okay, let's fix this now." You sit, you listen, you hold space. Can you do the same for yourself? Just once today, try it. When a difficult emotion arises, instead of analyzing it, instead of reaching for distraction, pause, breathe, and silently say, "Welcome. I see you." Stillness is not laziness. In a world obsessed with productivity, allowing is often mistaken for weakness, but stillness is not laziness. It is presence, and presence is powerful. It listens. It sees clearly. It waits for wisdom to arise instead of rushing toward reaction. The greatest leaders, the wisest healers, the most grounded people, they don't panic. They pause. They observe. And from that place, they act with clarity. Think of someone like Nelson Mandela. Years in prison, years without control. But within that stillness, he cultivated a strength deeper than action. He allowed the moment to shape him, not to shrink him, but to sharpen him. Could you allow life to shape you like that? What are you resisting? Ask yourself now, what part of your life are you still gripping tightly? What outcome are you obsessing over? What emotion are you trying to outrun? And gently ask, what would happen if I allowed it? What would happen if I said, "Yes, this is here. Yes, this too is part of my path. Yes, I don't know how this ends." And that's okay. This isn't about resignation. It's about relaxing into the flow of reality and trusting that what you meet, you can handle. You don't need to carry every burden all at once. Some things just need to be witnessed, not fixed. Practice. Let the moment breathe. Here's a practice you can try this week. Whenever a problem arises, big or small, before reacting, just pause. Take a single breath and silently say, "Let me witness this fully before I move." Notice how the need to control begins to loosen. Notice how often the situation doesn't require you to fix it, only to feel it, to stay present with it. And in that space, the right response usually appears on its own. A final thought. Allowing is not about avoiding life. It's about participating fully, but without needing it to go your way. It's the gentle strength of the open palm, not the tight fist. It's the quiet confidence that says, "I don't need to push the river. I can float with it." It's a radical kind of love for the people around you, just as they are love for life, even when it's uncertain, and love for yourself, messy, imperfect, real. So let yourself feel. Let the moment be. Let life move through you, not around you, because what you allow can transform you. Chapter 5. Responsibility without resistance. Responsibility is not a weight, it's a practice. But somewhere along the way, we confused the two. We started to believe that being responsible meant being tense, always pushing, always proving, always producing. But what if you could still carry what's yours without suffering under its weight? What if responsibility didn't have to feel heavy? What if you could move through your day like a river moves through its path, steady, soft, and unstoppable? The Sweeping Monk. There was once a young monk who rushed through his morning chores, eager to finish. He swept the courtyard quickly, trying to get to the next thing. An elder watched him for a while, and then said gently, "Don't sweep to finish. Sweep to sweep." That moment stayed with me. Ever since then, I've tried to approach everything, even the smallest tasks, not as something to get through, but something to be with. Washing dishes, writing a letter, tying my shoes. Each becomes a form of meditation if I allow it. So I ask you, What if your responsibilities weren't interruptions to your peace, but invitations into it? The myth of busyness. We live in a world that praises the busy. Have you noticed? How are you? Oh, just so busy. And we say it with pride, as if it means we're valuable. But busyness is not the same as meaning. Hustle is not the same as purpose. Activity is not the same as awareness. Sometimes we stay busy because we're afraid of what stillness might show us. Sometimes we pile on obligations because we think they prove our worth. But who would you be without all that noise? And more importantly, who are you when you do things slowly, intentionally? Duty from presence, not pressure. You can still be responsible and peaceful. You can still care deeply and stay soft. True responsibility doesn't come from fear. It doesn't come from guilt. It comes from presence. When I wash a bowl, I don't wash it because I have to. I wash it because it's the next loving thing to do. When I speak gently to someone in pain, I don't do it because it's expected, but because I know kindness ripples farther than I can see. You're not here to perform duty. You're here to embody it with grace, serving without resentment. How many times have you said yes while your heart whispered no? How many times have you helped but felt drained after? That's not real service. That's obligation. And it always breeds resentment. But when your giving comes from overflow, not pressure, it nourishes you too. So before you serve others, ask yourself, am I giving freely or am I giving to be seen? Am I acting from love or from fear of letting someone down? Even the smallest action, if done with clarity, becomes a sacred act. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is to say no, so that when you say yes, it's real. Sacred ritual in daily tasks. There is a quiet kind of holiness in the mundane, if we're awake enough to notice. Folding laundry, watering a plant, sweeping the porch, making tea. None of these are dramatic. None make headlines. But each becomes sacred when you bring your full attention to it. This week, try this. Choose one ordinary task, something you usually rush through, and slow it down. Fold the shirt with care. Feel the water as you nourish your plants. Inhale deeply as you boil the tea. Move like each action is a prayer. Let your presence transform the moment. From obligation to intention, especially as we age. Many older adults struggle with a quiet ache. They still want to be of service, but without being used. They want to give, but not out of guilt. If this is you, hear this. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. You are allowed to serve in new ways. Your wisdom, your presence, your listening. These are powerful gifts. You no longer need to prove yourself through busyness. You're not here to fill every silence with action. You're here to live more intentionally now, to offer your energy where it matters, to choose depth over duty. And if anyone says otherwise, remember, you don't exist to be convenient. You exist to be true. Reflection. Let one task be a ritual. Here's a small invitation, a practice you can begin today. Choose one daily task, just one. Maybe it's brushing your hair, or folding laundry, or lighting a candle. And for this week, let it become a ritual. Move slowly, breathe deeply. Let yourself be fully here, not rushing to what's next. Ask yourself, can I find peace in this? Can I make this sacred simply by paying attention? Let the task ground you. Let it remind you that presence, not performance, is the real measure of a meaningful life. A final word: responsibility isn't the enemy of peace, but resisting it, resenting it, will always make it heavier than it needs to be. So today, ask yourself, can I still show up fully without tightening? Can I still serve without self-sacrifice? Can I live with purpose and softness? The world doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be present. It needs you to sweep. Chapter 6. Living lightly in later years. There comes a time when the body begins to slow, but the spirit begins to sing. It's a quiet turning, not dramatic, not loud, just a soft inner shift. Maybe you felt it, that sense that doing more no longer means being more. And yet, the mind resists, because for so long we've measured our worth by output, how much we helped, how much we accomplished, how much we produced. But what if your deepest value doesn't lie in what you do, but in how you are? What if this chapter of life isn't about adding more, but being more? From doing to being. This transition is not always easy. You've spent decades solving, fixing, leading, guiding. Now, suddenly, the world grows quieter. The to-do list gets shorter. People stop asking so much of you, and maybe that stings a little. So let me ask, who are you when no one needs anything from you? Can you still find peace in just being? An 80-year-old poet, I once met a man in Kyoto, nearly 80 years old. Every morning, he would take a slow walk through a garden, watching the way the wind moved through the leaves, and then he'd return home and write one haiku. Just one. Each day he called it his offering to the world, not because anyone needed it, not because he'd be praised, but because it brought him joy, because it was enough. He told me, I no longer try to capture the world. I just try to notice it. Isn't that beautiful? Not chasing, not clinging, just noticing. That's living lightly. The grandmother who stopped giving advice. A woman once told me, I used to give my children so much advice. I thought it was love, but it was control in disguise. She laughed softly, remembering. Now she says little. She simply listens. She smiles. She holds their hands. She offers presents, and strangely, her family comes to her more than ever, because love doesn't always need words. Presence is enough. Can you relate? Have you ever tried so hard to help, when maybe the kindest thing was just to be there? Living lightly means. Living lightly does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop gripping. It means releasing the past, without regret, meeting the present, without demand, facing the future, without fear. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means forgiving. Being present doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing this with all your heart, and trusting the future doesn't mean being naive. It means realizing control was never the source of your safety. Can you begin to loosen your grip? Can you begin to float? The practice. 10 minutes by a window. Here's something simple and quietly radical. Each morning this week, sit by a window for 10 minutes. No phone, no distractions, no plans. Just watch. Watch how the light touches the floor. Watch a bird land, then leave. Watch the trees stretch without needing to impress anyone. Let the world happen, and don't try to change it. Let the moment be enough, and ask yourself, can I be like that tree? Still, rooted, unhurried, fully alive, without effort, responding to the inner voice. You may notice as things slow down that a new voice begins to whisper. It's quieter than the voice of ambition, softer than the voice of obligation. It's the voice that says, be gentle with yourself. You don't need to prove anything. You're allowed to enjoy this. Listen to that voice. It may sound like your younger self. It may sound like a wise elder. It may sound like silence, but it's telling the truth. You're allowed to live for beauty now, You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to choose peace, not just productivity. Is that a belief you can start to hold? An invitation to presence. There's something sacred about growing older, not because of what you've done, but because of who you're becoming. You are no longer the one holding everything together. You're the one holding space. And that is a quiet superpower. So take a breath, walk slowly, notice more. Let others hurry past. Let the wind carry what you no longer need to carry. And trust. What you are is already enough. A closing thought. We began our lives measuring success by speed, but perhaps now the deepest wisdom lies in the pause. So I'll leave you with a question. What would your life look like if you stopped trying to keep up and started simply to be, let yourself live lightly, let yourself be free? There is something sacred about returning to where we started, but with new eyes. Maybe all along you were never meant to conquer the storm, but to become the calm within it. What if the life you've been trying so hard to fix was never broken to begin with? What if healing was not about doing more, but allowing more? What if surrender isn't the end of effort, but the beginning of ease? We've walked this journey together, from clinging to control, to softening into surrender, from holding tight to who we thought we had to be, to releasing into who we truly are. And now, as we near the end, perhaps we begin to see the pattern more clearly. We are not the storm. We are the witness to it. We are not what we carry, not our roles, our worries, our identities. We are what remains when we release it all. And maybe, just maybe, the river never needed our steering. It has always known where it was going. Now it's time to float, time to trust the current, time to exhale. There is a soft power in this kind of living, a quiet bravery, to meet each day with openness instead of expectation, to feel fully and still be free to stop measuring your worth by what you produce and start seeing your worth in simply being alive. Letting go does not mean giving up. It means giving in to the wisdom of this moment. And in that giving in, something extraordinary happens. You stop resisting life and start receiving it. As Thich Nhat Hanh once said, letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness. If in our heart we still cling to anything, anger, anxiety, or possessions, we cannot be free. So let us release. Let us let go. Not because we are weak, but because we are ready. Ready to live from presence, not pressure. Ready to meet life, not manage it. Ready to finally come home to ourselves. Final reflection practice. Each night before sleep, place one hand gently over your heart. Close your eyes and whisper to yourself, I let go of what no longer serves me. I trust the flow. I am held. Let that be your prayer, your exhale, your return. Because in the end, you were never asked to hold it all, only to remember that you are already whole. And in this letting go, not only do you find peace, you finally come home.